Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Nick Halaris Show. Our guest this week is Sean Devlin, the founder of Nice News. Sean, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I've been super excited for this conversation. I stumbled across your work, your newsletter several months ago, and immediately signed up and have been enjoying reading every single day the positive news stories and uplifting news stories that you all bring together into your editions. So, love the product, and I'm excited to learn more about it.
Yeah, I'm excited to tell your listeners and readers about it.
Thank you. So I think the best place to start is let's just talk about Nice News. Like what
Mm,
is Nice News? Let's get into the product and
mm.
introduce it for the people who aren't already subscribed.
Yeah, definitely. So you mentioned it. Our core product is our daily email. So it's a 5-minute daily digest centered around only positive news. So we cover a variety of topics, everything from science to health to culture, the environment, human interest stories. Our goal is to really uncover stories that are often overshadowed by other major headlines. Oftentimes, the majority of news focuses on like 90% of their coverage on 10% of what's actually happening out there that's relevant. So our goal is to create a safe space to engage with news that's entertaining, relevant, and obviously positive. So for people to kind of frame their mindset towards optimism when they read it each morning. So that's our core product. We also publish articles on our website each day. We have social too, but really our focus is our daily email series.
Nice. And you guys have amassed quite a few readers. Like what's the
Mm.
count as of now?
Yeah, we're at a little over 840,000 readers or
And how
subscribers.
and how long have you been
Mm.
in publishing the daily?
It's been about 2.5 years now that we've been sending. We started with 5 days a week, and then we kind of transitioned to sending on weekends as well. And we do a Sunday edition that's more of a kind of like a weekly roundup and a little bit more of a lifestyle focus. So we send every single day now.
Yeah. That's
Mm.
an incredible amount of growth in a short amount of time. Like how did you
Mm.
where did all those 800,000 people come from?
Yeah, so I will say that I had been working in the email space for 5 years prior to launching Nice News, email publishing and web publishing. So, and launched a variety of brands. So, I was very familiar with the format of email as a channel for publishing content, but also like tools for growing subscribers. And we had the support of our parent company investor Optimism to support the initial growth. So, we got some initial growth through what we call kind of cross pollination, introducing subscribers of other brands to Nice News, up converting those individuals to subscribe to Nice News. We've done a good amount of media buying, meta ads. We've done swaps with other newsletters, collaborations, giveaways. So we have like a wide variety of tactics that we've used. We had like social campaigns where we tried to get people to subscribe. And I will say that our content does share really well, and that it is kind of like it strikes certain emotions. So we have a kind of a core audience that does love what we provide to them. So it results in them sharing with their friends and family too.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like I was reading, I forget which of the newsletter gurus had published it, but one of the newsletter gurus that I follow had
Mm-hmm.
published a chart of his own sort of trajectory from zero to several hundred thousand readers. And he had this interesting phenomenon where he had like three pieces go viral. And those three moments in time led to like something like 90% of all his subscribers. Like, are
Well,
you guys seeing that happen? Like
mm.
somebody starts sharing a story out and then you get a bunch of subscribers. Is that same phenomenon happening for you?
Oh my gosh, I wish it was 90%. We haven't seen like massive peaks like that, but there will be little peaks where we're like, oh, what caused that? And it will be likely like a story that was just really high engaging in a particular day. But or more website signups, we'll notice like the source that those subscribers come from. But I will say that like in terms of just like referrals, it probably is not more than like 10% of our audience. It's been difficult to really scale that as a channel. But there are pieces of content that end up resulting in peaks for sure.
Very cool. And
Mhm.
when you started Nice News, was it always intended to be daily?
Yeah, it was always intended to be daily. Yeah. So it was just
And,
kind of
and
getting to that. We're a pretty lean team, so and also like focusing on news, it can be a little bit more difficult just to create a process so that we can distribute a 5-minute digest every single day. But yeah, that was always the intention.
That was intent. Okay. I
Yeah.
was going to ask you, like, how do you pull it off? Because my
Mm,
cadence is like once or twice a week, depending on whether we
mm,
do a podcast, and it's really hard. How do you
yeah.
do a daily? What does a team
Mm,
look like, and how do
yeah.
you pull it off?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we really focus on editorial. So we have 3 full-time people on editorial and 2 people that have been with us pretty much since the beginning, a managing editor, an associate editor, and a staff writer and an assistant editor as well. A staff writer is more of a kind of a perma freelancer. We have some other freelance writers that support us with content that we're publishing, in particular on web, but our daily emails are internal, like we're creating all that content internally. We have some additional support through freelance, well, actually more like part-time curators. So we have a really kind of refined approach for curation, and we really like lean into the importance of curating, because ultimately what we're featuring in the email is resulting in everyone coming back, in addition to, of course, our tone of voice and product itself. But we really like see the importance of finding these stories that people are going to find relevant and, like I said, entertaining and engaging and uplifting. So we have their support in terms of filtering through different stories, providing that to the editorial team, and a really just refined process for selecting the content that we're going to be featuring in the daily email. And our editorial team has it's a really well-oiled machine at this point in terms of how we produce the edition and then edit and then schedule the campaigns. So it's it's our core focus, and we have kind of social running in the background as well, and also we're producing content on the web, but the majority of our effort goes towards that daily email.
Yeah. The curation, follow up on that. Like,
Mm.
I feel like if you rewind back to the beginning of the conversation, we're talking about sort of like the fundamental premise of Nice News, which is the
Yeah.
fact that when you look around, it's hard to find another example of it, because everyone else is sort of talking about like the walkie-talkies that blew up in Lebanon or whatever. Like, it's
Yeah.
news has always been sort of focused on these more violent or negative stories. Like, where do you even start looking for stories that are positive in a
Yeah,
world like ours?
for sure. They're out there. It's funny because when we first started Nice News, like I honestly didn't realize like how much content would be available for us to source from, and we were like, oh, maybe we'd be able to find like 3 stories a day or 5 stories a day that we can feature. And we realized pretty quickly there's a lot of positive news out there, or content that we deem as nice news that we could feature within our daily digest, that just is going like unseen or just not seen by a lot of people. So how it works is we have like around 100 publication sources, news sites that our curators are looking through and then submitting to our editorial team. That's kind of that initial feature, just our filter, excuse me, to make sure we're not missing anything. And there are also news aggregators that we use on our editorial team just to simplify the approach. But it's a pretty hands-on approach to make sure that we're not missing anything and just to get the best submissions. And then from there, we really filter that down to decide what fits within each section. So we'll have like a few featured stories, a few pieces in our in other news section, odds and ends, photo of the day, inspiring story. So it allows us just to have more content to pull from. But there's surprisingly a lot out there. It's just not being focused on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because it has these publications that you're finding stuff from have smaller audiences or whatever, and so not that many people see them. Essentially, is that the case?
Yeah, yeah. And I think obviously like everyone's familiar with like negativity bias. There's a reason that news outlets focus on the negative, because it will end up getting more clicks or more views. But ultimately people come to Nice News for uplifting content, and we're able to kind of lean into that, and that allows for us to still have really high engagement and a really loyal audience, but not lean into the negativity and divisiveness and what we're featuring.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Do you think that the places where you all are finding these stories, do you think that their models are like economically viable,
Mm-hmm.
or are these stories like inside of publications that are sort of making money from some other content?
Yeah, I think it's viable. I think that the problem is that kind of what I was getting at is like the fact that like as a species we've like evolved from people who are like constantly like scanning environments for threats and like anxious people. And I think that like it's difficult to counter that. And ultimately, if they're featuring 2 different stories and one that is really negative and divisive and sensational and gets people like riled up, that's going to likely engage more than something that's really positive. So it's hard when it's on that platform and they're trying to present certain stories. Like they're going to focus their efforts or their coverage on the stories that are engaging more that tend to be negative. So I think in order to counter that, it could work well for these platforms just to have like maybe certain sections of their app or website or whatever it may be that focus on positive content, so people have a place to go for that. Or like CNN has like a good stuff newsletter, so like different formats that allow for like distribution of that content that does still engage really well, because I think it can engage well. It just, you have to be like not going against the, like, I guess A/B testing it against something that's going to outperform it in, because of the fact that it's like presented in a certain way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does.
Um,
Super interesting. What do you think the size of this audience is? Like we are at 800,000 now. Like how
yeah.
many people do you think would love to read this kind of thing every day?
I mean, I'm hopeful, and I really believe that it is millions. I think that with the current format that we have a roadmap to scale Nice News to millions of subscribers. And I mean, from our initial market research, we like unsolicited to people, just understanding what it is that people are looking for in news. Like pretty much everyone that we interviewed said that they want more positivity and like less divisiveness. And I think that news outlets try and it doesn't work for them, like because of what we were just saying. So I think it's just trying to find the angle that like results in what people say that they want, and like providing it to them in a way that is still entertaining. And that's kind of where we're trying to cast a little bit of a wider net with Nice News, where um like over 80%, almost 90% of people weren't familiar with any good news outlets that were out there, and the one that most people were familiar with was Upworthy, which is arguably a little bit more kind of feel good, was more social focused, maybe more celebrity focused. So we were trying to find something that's not just kind of feel good and not just maybe more niche or social impact focused, but providing a wide variety of positive stories in a format that's really easy to engage on a daily basis, and relevant and entertaining.
Yeah. The Upworthy one that you mentioned, that was backed by what, Ashton Kutcher or something like that?
I think he might have had, or maybe he backed Upworthy too, but I think he might have had there was another brand
Another
that,
one,
or
right?
another
Yeah.
publication that went under that he backed too. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah, I'm mixing up the names, but I know
Mm-hmm.
that another of our friends and colleagues in the space who's actually been on the podcast before, Isaac Saul from
Oh,
Tangle,
cool. Oh, yeah.
which is a
Love Tingle. Yeah.
which is a great publication, and it's
Yeah.
sort of it's not nice news, but
Mm-hmm.
he's attempting to engage in the political discourse in a nice way. So it is very kind of aligned. But
Yeah,
he had
definitely.
mentioned that he worked for the Ashton Kutcher version first. That was
Yeah.
how he kind of got into this world at some point. But I forget
Oh,
the name of
cool.
it. Yeah.
Looking it up.
Um, the monetization strategies, like how are you guys thinking about that?
It's A plus is what it was. I was trying to remember
A
the name.
plus. Oh, okay.
A plus, yeah.
A plus. Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Yep.
Yeah, and we love Tingle too. We've done a few like collaborations with them too. They're doing great work.
Yeah.
For monetization, for people that are familiar with email newsletters, it's a pretty kind of typical format where the majority of our revenue is generated in the inbox. Obviously, our eyeballs are in the inbox, or our subscribers' eyeballs are in the inbox. So we'll collaborate with a variety of brands that we think are going to align with our audience's interests. We'll have the logo of the brand we're collaborating with at the top of the daily email. And then we'll have a featured sponsored section after the first featured story, with a write up. And we'll do that in a way that's really kind of organic and fits and flows within the email effortlessly, where our goal is for our subscribers to be like genuinely interested in what we're presenting to them. And it's also like in our tone of voice, our editorial team will collaborate with our whatever brand that they're working with to make it kind of read in a way that feels very Nice News. So that's our core product. And then we have also a secondary placement and a Something We Love placement that we launched earlier this year, which is like product curations. And that's actually done really well for us. And we've noticed in our most recent subscriber survey, like 94% of our audience trusts our product recommendations. So they really enjoy that we're recommending various like sustainable and good brands that are out there too.
Yeah, that's interesting. I noticed over the years, thinking about the products that, like, if you look at some of the sort of OG um, content creators like a Tim Ferriss or somebody like that. They
Yeah.
had these brands that basically started supporting them and that everyone else is supported by the same one. So like if you took the
Mm.
top 10 people on with podcasts, it's like AG1
Yeah.
and I forget the other companies
Like
but they all,
Element
it's like
and
some mattress company,
yeah.
it's AG1,
Mm.
it's products like that, but they seem to, it must work because they continue to
Yeah.
sponsor the same people for a long time, for like maybe even a decade or something. So
Mm.
obviously these product placements are working.
Yeah, they definitely are. I mean, there's a reason that like those brands continue to spend money in the inbox, and I think it's an easier sell to brands who understand the performance of email newsletters than maybe people who aren't currently spending in the newsletter space. But it's a channel that has a lot of transparency. I mean, you can see the number of impressions you're getting with open rates. You can see obviously engagement through click rates. So it's kind of a mixed model in terms of like brand awareness, but also performance, where you can also, of course, look at conversions from that traffic too. So it can work for a variety of brands, like direct consumer brands, or it can work for a variety of brands. We did a collaboration with Subaru where they're like a Subaru Gives Back campaign. So
Interesting.
we were able to get a lot of eyeballs on an initiative that they have, but obviously they're not looking at like car sales from that campaign. So it depends on the
Depends on
campaign,
what
but
they're doing.
yeah.
Do you think that with your audience, like
Mm.
somebody, let's say there was like a social impact philanthropy movement, do you think they could raise money through your audience in that
Mhm.
kind of a sponsorship?
Yeah, I think it would be an interesting model. I mean, we'd love to collaborate with a variety of organizations on that, and we actually we do a cause of the month with Nice News. So the beginning of every month, we'll feature a new organization just to bring awareness to initiatives that they're doing and allow our subscribers to donate through a platform. And so that's done really well for. I mean, we're not obviously getting anything out of it. It's more just raising awareness and hopefully helping support that organization and raising funds.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's cool. I feel like there's a lot of like opportunity for that kind of
Yeah,
thing with your
definitely.
audience and with
Yeah.
newsletters. I feel like
Mm.
people are really waking up to the power of newsletters. I'm not just saying that because you and I happen to be in the newsletter game, but
Mm.
my favorite artist is Dua Lipa, and
Yeah.
even Dua Lipa is in the newsletter game.
Oh, I didn't know that actually.
Yeah,
I
so
need to
Dua
subscribe to
started
hers.
this
Yeah.
newsletter
Okay.
called Service 95, which you should check out because it's sort of on mission with Nice News,
Oh yeah.
where she's curating interesting cultural stories, and then she's also featuring like socially conscious fashion and beauty products, which I'm sure are doing well because like she has an incredible following. And um,
I
yeah,
just
so
subscribed. Yeah.
everyone's in on it. Let me know what you think about that after you have a chance to read it.
Yeah. I love it. Yeah. It seems like a lot of, I mean, I'm surprised more celebrities aren't getting into it because I think there's a lot of opportunity for just using newsletters as a platform to engage with the audience that they already have. So this is
Yeah,
really cool.
yeah, I
Yeah.
think so. I feel like the the celebrities, in my view, are sort of at risk because if they don't do something like a newsletter or an email list, whatever they want to call it, because
Hmm.
these platforms are like fickle. And yeah,
Yeah.
like okay, today you have 300 million Instagram followers, but like what happens if that business model kind of changes or the Department of Justice tries to break up Meta and like the whole thing could change
Yeah.
overnight and then these incredibly powerful audiences could just be gone.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, I mean, we mentioned Upworthy earlier. They had that problem with Facebook where the algorithm changed and their revenue like decreased by however
Yeah.
many percent, like in half within weeks. So I think yeah, I mean, you're not beholden to certain platforms if you have, I mean, there is Gmail obviously, but still, I mean, if you're able to maintain deliverability, like you have like email is the key to the internet. And I think that people are starting to realize that more and more, the value of having subscribers.
Yeah. Like a subscriber is worth way more
Yeah,
than a follower financially, like
for sure.
over the life of it. It's
Yeah.
an interesting thing to keep track of. You mentioned earlier sort of the different categories of stories. So I jotted a few of them down:
Yeah.
science, health, culture.
Mhm.
What are the ones that are the most popular, or does it
Yeah.
change every day?
It does change, which is actually pretty exciting in that it's not like there's sometimes our editorial team, like we know a certain story is going to like head out of the ballpark or like, okay, this is going to do really well. But then other times there are stories that surprise us. We're like, oh, wow, I didn't realize that was going to engage with our audience so as well as it did. And on our end, we're just really looking at clicks. We'll see health stories do really well for us, ones that feel like they kind of have direct impact for our subscribers' lives. Culture stories can do well. We'll have like everyday heroes is a category that has worked really well for us, and audience is interested in kind of the feel good aspect of those stories. But it can vary. So there are sometimes stories that surprise us too. And within the email also, it won't always be like the featured stories that get the most clicks. We'll sometimes randomly have the most clicks in like the odds and ends section or miscellaneous section at the bottom of the email. So it is surprising sometimes what ends up getting the most engagement.
What people, yeah, that's interesting. Have you ever had like a story where you had negative reactions to it, or like turned out to be fake news or some crazy thing like that?
Honestly, we don't get a lot of. I almost like wish, not that I wish that we got more negative feedback, but more like constructive feedback around like things that I think that when we do get negative feedback, and I think there's this realization from the team that like it's impossible for us to please everyone and for everything to be considered like nice news by all of our subscribers. So we're always thinking through the lens of like, is this a story that is like nonpartisan or bipartisan? Like, is this a story that our audience is going to, the greater majority of our audience is going to deem as positive? And like, why is that? Does it make people feel more like optimistic about the world, more connected to others? Kind of asking ourselves these questions that help frame the stories. And there will sometimes be stories where it's not like it's fake news, but more so like, I don't see this as positive, or for whatever reason that they bring up. But surprisingly, it doesn't happen as much as you would think.
Yeah. Okay. So people aren't. Maybe it has something to do with like the self-selection. Like if you're inclined to sign up for nice news, you're probably less likely to be confrontational or get offended easily. Who knows? There must be some kind of dynamic to it. Yeah.
Yeah.
How did you get the idea for nice news in the first place?
Yeah. So it kind of, I mean, it's something that I mentioned I had been working in the email newsletter space for a little while. So it's an idea we had kind of thrown around for a little while. But what really solidified it was kind of early 2021 when COVID cases were peaking, and I found myself checking the New York Times app on a daily basis, like looking at COVID case counts. And it got to the point where I like forced myself to take a step back, and I was like, is this healthy? Is this necessary for me to be like aware as to how many COVID cases there are today amongst other major overwhelming headlines? And I like decided just to like disconnect and disengage with news for a little while, and not read headlines. And I realized like personally my mental health felt like it was improving. And through conversations with friends, loved ones, I realized that a lot of people kind of felt that same way, where they just felt overwhelmed by news and the negativity in news, the divisiveness in news, to the point where they just decided to disengage altogether. And it just felt like there had to be an alternative, and like a healthy alternative. And that's where nice news came in, is that we felt like there has to be more good news out there that's just not getting seen. And like, what platform or what approach would allow us to get positive news out there in a way that is engaging, that people want to read? Because ultimately, like, it seems like there's a need here, but people haven't been able to see success in this in the past. And why is that? And how can we present it in a way that's going to result in a really like high engaged audience?
Yeah, and I'm guessing that sort of every newspaper entrepreneur in times past has thought about this issue, right? Like, and they, like you mentioned earlier, they probably all have little sections of the paper, but you all are doing something novel, which is like your front headline is positive, which is the unique. I think that's the unique part. Obviously, it's like it's not like the little like odds and ends at the end of the paper after you've read about all the wars and diseases and accidents that happened. It's, here we go, we're starting with the positive on page 1.
Totally. Yeah, very true.
Yeah. And I feel you about this sort of unhealthy side of all this. I feel the same way about social media. And there's a lot of people out writing interesting things about how you should manage your sort of content diet and what you should pay attention to. And I've been really trying to do that, because it does actually make a noticeable difference in sort of your mood, your internal subjective feelings about the world and where you stand in the world. Like, some of this stuff is really unhealthy. Like the comparative stuff that happens when you look on social media, I think that's incredibly unhealthy. And then just engaging with the world as if it's some giant battleground is also
Yeah,
unhealthy. Yeah.
I completely agree. Yeah, I think um, I recently came across this study at Harvard Business Review that talked about like it was a 10-year study around like optimists versus pessimists and like how that has an impact on your life. And it was interesting. The conclusion that they made was that optimists are actually more likely to be fulfilled and happy, obviously, that those are expected, but also more likely to earn more, which I think was a really interesting conclusion where it's like, I think it was the pessimists, cynics ended up earning in terms of increase in their salary a third of the amount that the optimists did. And I think that it's like how you engage in the world has so many like different outcomes in your life in terms of like success, but also fulfillment. Where if you are an optimist, you're like seeing opportunity, you're maybe trying more versus like constantly being on defense and like seeing everything as a threat. And it's like it's so important to engage in the world where like you have trust in others. And I think that like engaging with negative content or like reading overwhelming news stories can kind of like frame your viewpoint for like seeing the world as this really like negative, dangerous place where it results in you interacting with others in that same with that same mindset where it's like seeing people as threats or seeing situations as threats and not seeing them as opportunities. So I think it's really important, like the content that you're consuming and how that impacts your perception of the world and how you interact in the world.
Yeah. I completely
Um,
agree with that. I feel like I've written a couple articles on Profit Plus about this, and there's actually a really cool book called "The Art of Possibility."
hmm,
It's by two authors. I remember one of them is by Xander, but I'll provide notes and for listeners about it. But "The Art of Possibility," like half the book is essentially about how if and when you can maintain an optimistic mindset, you significantly increase the probability of seeing the opportunity in the moment. Where
hmm,
like if you're like a negative curmudgeon and you're like engaging in business, because business is fundamentally, people forget, like it's a fundamentally creative act. It may seem like it's like this like mathematical spreadsheet thing, but that's not really what's happening in business. Businesses are acts of creation, and they evolve over time, they change, and business models change, and being able to see that is and riff off of it and iterate, like that's how you end up making a lot of money. And our schools sort of teach a different angle on it. And so I'm a huge fan of kind of the idea of remaining open to the possible, because you
hmm.
just never know. You never know who you're going to meet. You never know what's going to happen in the world. You never know what idea you're going to have. And it can change everything on pretty quickly.
Yeah, totally. Completely agree.
What's your vision for the sort of products? Like Nice News has got this phenomenal daily email, which I highly recommend everyone check out. What else is in the works?
Hmm. Yeah, and that's like I said, that's been our focus, but we do publish articles on our website every day too, and we want to continue to expand the amount of reporting that we're doing and content that we're including within our email, linking out to our website versus various publications, which we'll continue to do, but more and more to our website. So that's in our work, really expanding the kind of breadth of content and original reporting that we're doing on our website and types of content that we're including on our website. Um, Long term, I think that there's an opportunity for us to do even a podcast. Obviously, you've seen success there. A lot of people have seen success there. And through our surveys, it seems like our audience would be really interested in listening to a podcast version of Nice News or a podcast from Nice News. Um, I think it could be interesting to do a native app where there's a space for people to engage with positive news on an actual application outside of just referencing or pulling up our website or going to our email. So long term, I think we could definitely lean into that. And we've also been kind of toying with the idea of doing online events and with thought leaders and providing an opportunity for our audience to engage with thought leaders or learn certain topics and collaborating and hosting those events. So that's something that we're potentially going to test next year. But for now, we've really been honing our focus on our daily email. And I still think there's more that we can do there with our email. We have a really consistent format that our subscribers have known and come to love. But testing new sections like even interviews within the inbox or other sections that we can test out and see what resonates with our audience.
Yeah, for sure. Like you can cover what I've sort of come to realize doing the podcast for a couple of years is that there's this. like growing army of people, and it's thousands upon thousands of people out there in the world who are engaging with the world in a very sort of on brand way with nice news, meaning
Mhm.
in some fashion or another, they're attempting to make the world better. Now, I've talked to a lot of people who are particularly focused on the political side. So they're trying to create a more perfect union here in the United States. But there's also like thousands of social entrepreneurs who are pursuing business strategies that are also having some kind of positive impact in socially or culturally. There's authors who are kind of trying to push the bounds. There's artists, like there's millions of people, let's call it what it is, that are doing this. And they have, at the moment, they have a very small number of spaces where they can go to get featured. You know, the lucky few become, part of the mainstream world by, producing a book or work of art that gets them into the popular media. But for the rest, there's like a small like ecosystem of podcasts and things. Like that's the only place, and news outlets, obviously, like Nice News. That's the only place. But I'm convinced there's a lot of people, a lot of stories that aren't being told that people would want to hear. Like your audience, for example, would want to hear.
Mhm. Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah. I saw something recently that you guys were experimenting with something on the Calm app. I forget what the feature was, but what is
Mm-hmm.
that?
Yeah, we featured, there was something new that the app incorporated. I'm blanking on it now. Let me pull it up.
Yeah, I thought it was like a someone reading like nice news stories at night or something like that. Like as a way to calm yourself down before you disengage from the world and try to go to bed. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and it's interesting because I mentioned the survey that we recently did. We were curious, like if people were reading nice news before or after their typical news diet, because the majority of our subscribers are still engaging with other news outlets too, which we're not by any means trying to replace these important news outlets and the coverage that they're doing, just trying to supplement that. And the majority of people are reading it actually before they read other news. And I kind of wish it was the opposite, where people would like catch up on the news and then kind of end their news consumption with nice news to ultimately kind of filter the rest of their day through that positive mindset. And also, the greater majority of our subscribers are reading it either in the early morning or morning time. So I think there's something interesting there in terms of like having some sort of ritual before bedtime and having that be positive as well. So you're not
Yeah.
kind of ruminating on negative things right before falling asleep. But yeah, I mean, the Calm obviously app does great work for daily rituals there too.
Yeah. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
What do you like thinking about your own life arc?
Mm.
What, is there anything in your upbringing or background that like led you to this mission?
Yeah, I mean, I was trying to think about what would feel like it would translate to what I'm doing now at Nice News. I had an interesting upbringing in that I actually moved back and forth from Asia growing up, so I had a lot of change, transition. Originally from Portland, but lived about like a third of my childhood in Asia, and kind of resulted in a lot of curiosity and openness and willingness to experience and interest in experiencing new cultures and ways of being. And I think that actually the first concept that I worked on in the email space was in the travel space. It was called the Discover, which was kind of like a micro travel guide delivered to your inbox each week featuring a new destination. And the mission of that brand was to expand people's perspectives or allow people to see the world through a new perspective or someone else's viewpoint. I think that kind of like translates a little bit to what we're doing even at Nice News, where we're trying to shift people's mindsets and ultimately allow people to view the world through an optimistic perspective. So I don't know if there's a direct correlation there, but I think this sort of like willingness to view the world through a different lens can, or just this openness can ultimately allow you to be more kind of willing to engage with content like Nice News or Discover.
Sure. And where in Asia were you going back and forth from and to?
Hong Kong, Tokyo, Bangkok, and Seoul, kind of all
That's
over.
that's incredible. You lived in all of those places as a kid.
Yeah.
Do you speak any Asian languages?
A little bit of Japanese, but honestly, it's sad how quickly you forget it when you don't use it. And yeah, it's funny because
Yeah.
I speak Spanish now, being in Southern California.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
That's.
yeah.
And did you like go to
Mm.
school in when you were doing this?
All international schools, yeah. So it was all taught in English, but obviously you
I see.
learn some to kind of to get around too.
I see.
Yeah.
Were your parents in
Yeah.
like the Secretary of State's office or something like that, or?
No, my mom worked for Nike, so her job took us abroad. But yeah, my sister actually currently works for the State Department, so it's funny to see kind of her kids have a similar upbringing where they're moving every couple of
They're
years.
moving
Yeah.
all over the place. Yeah,
Yeah.
that is very unusual, but to me that makes perfect sense. Like those are all of those places are like drastically different cultures from Portland and from each other.
Mhm.
And so yeah, having that like window gave you something different than what most Americans would have gotten in their upbringing.
Yeah.
Which is very
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
What's your vision? I know we talked a little bit about the vision for Nice News, but is it to run Nice News forever and grow it as big as
Mm.
possible? Like, what's your grand
Mm.
plan in life?
Oh my gosh. I mean, for now, I really am honing my focus on Nice News growth. We talked a little bit about partnerships and revenue. We're in a position where we're profitable now, which is really exciting as of earlier this year. And a lot of my focus was on sales and partnerships. We recently brought on board a director of partnerships in June who's been fantastic. And he's kind of overseeing all of that now. So it allows me to really hone our focus on like new tactics for growth. And I'd love to be, our goal is to get to 1 million subscribers by the end of the year. And next year, I mean, I'd love to get to the point where we're at millions of subscribers over the next few years. So that's been a core focus of mine, is figuring out how we can get there. But even beyond Nice News, we see kind of, I mean, we see Nice News as a positive news platform. So there's a lot that we can do there, a lot of
Yeah,
opportunity. But we have a few other kind of extensions of Nice and the gaming vertical. We have a brand called Crossword Club, which is a crossword that we produce every single day. And we're exploring other games that we can produce that are really kind of like engaging your mind and positive uplifting games that we can produce within Nice. So that's something that I'm working on the side as well.
nice. I think it's a great idea. Like I a bunch of my friends and I do the New York Times games, and I
Yeah,
do some. I do one with my mom every day, and it's actually a really fun way to kind of stay connected with people and
yeah, true. Yeah.
compete in a very friendly way,
Mhm.
like
Mhm.
and actually learn something new every day. So I feel
Totally.
like
Yeah. And it's
lots.
cool to see like the growth of that vertical for them. It seems like it's a huge like revenue driver, and also engagement. Like the amount of time that people spend on games in their app, I think might even be more than the news. I'm not sure what the numbers are now, but it's pretty crazy to see.
Yeah, I think that's like their killer app at this point. Like
Yeah.
it's a New York Times game. I don't actually
Yeah.
subscribe to New York Times, but I do subscribe to the games app because
Yeah.
there's 5 or 6 cool games that I find intellectually stimulating and fun, and it's worth the money. But I don't read the paper anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, too many good newsletters. I don't read any. I feel bad. I don't. I used to love subscribing to newspapers, but I don't anymore because I read newsletters.
Yeah, yeah. And that's why I think we focus so much on curation too, because it's like the format works really well where we're doing the work for you. We are like filtering it down to content that we know you're going to find interesting and
Yeah.
presenting it in a way that's super easy to engage. You can read the whole thing, you can skim. But yeah, I think that there's a reason that people are starting to subscribe to more newsletters based on their interests, because
Yeah.
it's easy. We do the work for you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Sean, this has been a super fun conversation. I'm really nice to kind of meet you officially, and
Yeah,
I'm
you
excited to
too.
help spread the word about Nice News. Encourage everyone to sign up. It's a really fun product that you're going to enjoy every single day. So, Sean, thanks for being here, and I look forward to kind of tracking your progress over time.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great chatting with you. Nice to meet you too.
Thanks.